afternoon and welcome to Cover Notes. Cover Notes are Insurance Europe's regular half-hour webinar events. And the idea of Cover Notes is to showcase people and topics that have or are making the news in the insurance world. And it makes me very happy to welcome Petra Hielkema for the launch event of Cover Notes. Petra, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. I should say that, the idea to have this first exchange of views with you is apparently attractive to a lot of people. We have close to 600 registrations, so we dive directly into our discussion. You started in Iopa as chairwoman, first chairwoman in Iopa on the 1st of September. I think you have just had your first Board of Supervisors meeting last week. But I was looking a little bit at your CV and I noted you have a master in law and economics. You have also a master in Russian studies. So how and why did you choose in the end to work in insurance? It's not a direct path, I would say.
No, it's maybe it's not, but maybe I should say that insurance chose me in the sense that when I started at the central bank and I started in the policy department, the first assignment I got was insurance, and I took that on, of course. But I did choose to stay in insurance, and I think the reason for that was first of all the entire Solvency II project that was coming. Russian studies, when you study that in the 90s, is very much a study about transition, about systems in transition. And I do believe that Solvency II very much was a transition for Europe to go through, and that was interesting. Also because it has this policy part, but it has a technical part as well. And I think in general, that is what I like about insurance. It mixes, I think, content, technique, and the need to think and understand on the one hand with a part of taking care of society and being relevant, maybe not even always noticed by policyholders, but it does give you a good feeling at the end of the day when you work in insurance. So I think that's how it started. Maybe to add, on my first week already, a colleague next to me was leaving and she was, cleaning up her desk and she had this document with European flags. And I said, what is it? And she said, I coordinate something that is called EIOPA. It's in Frankfurt and it coordinates European insurance supervision. And I said, and who's taking that over from you? And she said, I don't know yet. And I said, can I do? And that's also how I started to work on Iopa and its predecessor, EIOPA. So it was a good start that week in the end.
So long experience, but I think it's an experience many of us have who land in insurance. It's often by chance, but then we are fascinated and stay. Let me ask a little bit about your personal experience with insurance, with your insurers. Are you happy with your insurers? Or are there things that you would maybe improve?
Good question. Yes, I am happy with my insurers. I really am. They once even surprised me after I had some damage to report, and they actually sent me back and said, go to a proper shop, get a proper quote. And that quote was better than what I found with Google. So I think they were very supportive. And so I have many good experiences. And I think it always starts with the fact that I actually talk to real people, that they show empathy when they talk to me. They support me in understanding what I have to do. And then when I have sent in the documents, it doesn't take long for them to also recover my damages. It doesn't happen often, fortunately, but I have a good impression. Now, would I improve something? I think when I say this, I'm a very financially but also digitally quite capable person. And I must say that all these contacts start through a website or they start through an app. And I think we need to realize that not everyone has that ability. and still would like to reach out to its insurer sometimes. So I would just say keep that in mind, that there is still a vast group of people in Europe that does not have either the reading ability or the literacy to start and to finally end up with a person that then can talk to them. But once you have them on the line, it's good.
Okay, but I'm sure we touch on digital issues and, a bit the future orientation later. Let me stick a little bit with you as an insurance client. Now, when you buy an insurance product, what do you do? Do you shop around? Do you compare? Do you read all these pre-contractual information, that are provided by your insurer? And more importantly, do you think others do that?
Well, to be honest, how it started, I must say it's mostly my husband doing the shopping, and then he ends up with like a top 3. And then I do go through the conditions, but I've started to do that more since I'm more in insurance. So I think I did it less in the past. And I think that immediately is also an answer to your question. I think not all people always go through all the details and only find out at the end that what is there. And I really feel it also depends on how information is presented, how clear it will influence how much people actually read.
Yeah, and I think there we have still a lot of work to do. At least that would be the perspective clearly that I guess I would personally bring, but also that we would bring from an industry perspective. Now, let's turn a little bit lessons drawn from the crisis, from the pandemic. And again, what we got back during the pandemic was if there were questions about insurance, they often related to exactly what is covered, what is excluded. And that begs the question then, again, now turning more to the regulatory side, where are we currently with regulation? Are we maybe a little bit too price fixated and cost oriented on the one hand side? That could be an issue. And then there is, I think, this other challenge that we have a very strong push at European level to make insurance comparable with all kinds of other products. And sometimes that is to the detriment of insurance because other products obviously do not provide, risk coverage, risk protection. And then sometimes, it's simple things that we don't have enough space to explain our products. Would you say, when you look at the pandemic and key lessons learned, are we already at a stage where consumers really understand, what insurance offers them and how it matters? And what can you as Iopa do to help improve this moving forward?
Yes. I think, and I mean, it's not a good thing, but I think that unfortunately quite often insurance is something that you only appreciate or really realize what you actually have when you need it and not when you buy it. So I think in all cases, it's always hard to make people really read what they want. And I do believe that also through regulation, but I would assume also just through the ambition and the client friendliness of an insurer, you make this effort to present it better, to make it easier accessible, etc. At the same time, I don't think we're there yet. I think first of all, we've identified a few gaps in expectations during the pandemic. So I think that is something we need to address. And I think that is with any crisis, you always find something that wasn't clear. Now we can deal with that. But I also see that sometimes the information that needs to be provided is serving several goals. And in that, it just creates a complexity that is not always serving to the client or to the small enterprises. And I do think that we need to continue to look at that and ensure that products are clear and not so clear that we give every detail, but that because that would be too much then again, but we find the right balance in managing expectations, realizing what is covered at one end, and still where possible ensure comparability.
Yeah, and especially, when we compare different products, maybe one idea would also be to show that other products maybe do not provide protection. Sometimes it's the small things that make people realize, oops, this is really also a difference between the products on offer. Now, coming back to, what we learned in the pandemics with lockdown, certainly one lessons again drawn, I think, in the insurance sector was that it was innovation, preparedness, digitalization that allowed insurance to really serve their clients also in the crisis. But we are still struggling, again, when we look at regulation with a lot of paper-based requirements. I hear you in terms of, you mentioned by way of introduction, we shouldn't forget those who are not maybe the digital natives and those who would potentially struggle more to engage with companies digitally. But, are we getting the approach right now correctly? And what is the orientation moving forward? It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yes, and I think this is an area that is very much in development, and clearly I think the benefit, if there was a benefit, but from the pandemic, is that we've seen that we are actually capable of a lot, and that if we were not, we by now, since it's taking so long, have improved. So I think those who are digital a bit behind also in some parts of Europe, I think the level playing field when it comes to being able to work together digitally has very much improved. And I must just say a compliment to the entire insurance industry, how swiftly they were able to move back into remote working and continue to service clients. I think that was, at least at our supervisory table, already quite clear, not a concern. And I think that just shows how well you did that. Now, moving forward, I think the way forward is digital. And I think there are many ways to interact with people and to even adjust digital tools to people who need other products or other ways of interacting digitally. At the same time, I do mention the need to also be aware of not everyone being digital is, I also worked in payments for 3 years, and there it's even more acute. But there you saw that about 50 million Europeans have either a disability or an educational lack by which they are not really capable of doing digital business on the finance part. And I think the most difficult one there to solve is sight. If sight and if reading ability is difficult, that's the most difficult to challenge. But for other hurdles, there are solutions. And I think if you can think about that from the start, while you digitalize, we can move into a much more digital way of serving customers and improve that experience, but also make insurance more efficient. But just keep in mind the inclusivity, because I truly believe that people need to be independently able to get an insurance policy if they want to, and not ask the help of others.
No, and I think that is clearly the ambition, but overall the trend certainly goes towards more digital, and that eventually, I guess, will also have to be reflected then ultimately in the regulatory framework. Now, let's move on to another very topical issue. We are speaking now less than 1 month before COP26. I think this is currently a topic that decides elections, but it is also a topic that, of course, the insurance sector has been engaged with for, now a very long period, somewhat, I think, a pioneer function. But when you look at it now from your new perspective, what do you think needs to be done to close the climate protection gap? What can we do to, ensure insurability of some of these risks?
Well, first of all, have it on your agenda. Discuss it with each other. I think the fact that we are indeed now giving so much importance to this topic is different from a few years ago. So that's the first, and I think Europe is doing very well there. I think the second is that we need to close the data gap. I think we need data to see where the gaps are, where it functions, where the framework functions, where insurance functions, and where there are actual gaps. It starts with the data. Now, once we have identified the gaps, I also believe that the insurance market itself, in order to remain relevant to consumers, needs to see how they can provide products that will help to serve filling those gaps. And then in the end, there might also be a need for dialogue at public-private, what can be done. But what I sometimes feel, in all honesty, is that the dialogue starts with the public-private, whereas I would believe that between identifying the gaps and public-private discussions, there is still a lot of room for insurers to see what products they can provide, and also how they can incentivize people to buy those products because they are aware of the risks. Having said that, I think of course, the obvious other role that particularly insurance, I really believe, I'm not just saying that to say something nice in speeches, I really believe that insurers can play this additional role in incentivizing their policyholders in changing behavior, in becoming more adaptive to the changes that are coming. And I think that in itself as a combination will hopefully ensure that insurers play a very positive role in this transition.
Yeah, we see that. I think it's a good point you are making. We see that increasingly, generally in the general insurance area, the non-life area, that the prevention bit and the servicing bit is playing an ever-increasing role. And there is certainly benefits to be had from conversations, or certain stewardship that insurers can provide when it comes to, if you build this way, your premiums can potentially go down. These are the kind of conversations I think that will probably need to happen more and more, and have certainly started some time ago. We have now discussed, what can we do to cover the gap, but then there is also, I think, this other part of the equation where we have to be honest and say there are probably risks that simply cannot be covered by insurance. We have that certainly on the climate side. I'm talking, for example, building in flood zones. Generally, we have better and better risk mapping when it comes to building codes. What can Iopa also do to help support this part of the discussion? Because insurers find themselves sometimes, criticized for all the wrong reasons. Is there, from your perspective, also a possibility to step up and explain how insurance in the end works and what is doable and what sometimes also what is not doable?
I believe that we for sure have a role to explain and to show that insurers manage the risks of society. And as I said at the start, I think you also in the pandemic were able to serve many clients. And of course, in those areas where it didn't go well, it's often the front page. But I think overall, we also communicated it was a positive role. I think secondly, with our NetCat dashboard, we can identify where possible gaps could be when it comes to being insured, but also to potential damages in the future. Finally, I think now maybe third, and then I'll make a final comment. I think that there is also the need to really collect more data and see what we can do. If you now look, for example, in the US, major hurricanes, thanks to data, it is more and more, they are more and more capable of actually predicting where damage will be, and therefore also supporting insurers into understanding what risks they are insuring. Having said that, there might be at the end of that discussion room or no room for insurance anymore, and more help is needed. And I think there you could see what public-private discussion needs to happen there. But again, I would also very much encourage insurers to see how they can fill the space in the private market to deal with this new risk. I understand they're new. I understand more data is needed. We can help there, as I said, but let's also look at other experiences with major risks that happen more frequently and how you can deal with those. And we're happy to also coordinate there among our members to just share what practices are already in place.
Well, generally, I think this is definitely an area where coordination and cooperation is asked for. And I guess that is something that we will definitely continue. Now, obviously, we would be remiss or amiss if we are not talking about Solvency II in our first discussion. We are clearly now at the beginning of the review of the framework. The framework has served Europe well. But you know that, at least from an industry perspective, while being very positive about Solvency II, there were always, right from the start, certain concerns that have, in the end, certainly from our perspective, been confirmed over times. That, there is excess volatility. There is also excessive capital requirements for long-term business. It's a long stretch to ask, do you share these concerns? But do you at least understand them?
Yes, well, I think, yes, we definitely have to discuss Solvency II, and I'm sure this is not the last time. So we should... I think on the volatility part, I think supervisors recognize that there's definitely volatility in the framework that is sometimes hard to manage. And I think particularly end of March last year, you saw the volatility do its thing, and that of course then if you want to run a company, I see that that's hard. I also believe that Iopa, in its advice for the solvency review, had tried or recommended to be more favorable. Prudent, but more favorable in the treatment of some liquid liabilities and also some investments in the long run. So I do think in that is a recognition that we need to deal with that. At the same time, I truly believe also that it has to be for long-term investments, because I think that is what the discussion then should be about. And we also believe, and we published that Friday, that some of our proposals are now stretched a little bit and moving in a direction where we then have a bit of a concern, or we have a concern on the level of prudency that can be achieved if we do it that way. But for sure, I think that is something that then we need to discuss further.
Yeah, I mean, we are all very much, I think, respectively at the beginning of analyzing the proposals. I mean, it's a huge set of very detailed proposals, but in terms of a very first reaction, sometimes we have a feeling there is recognition on your end, and then, there are proposals being made, but then maybe, at the same time, one hand gives and the other takes away, when it comes, especially now to volatility, maybe we have a bit of a challenge then with the risk correction or extrapolation. We don't have to go into the detail now, but just to give you a first, feedback in terms of the current sentiment. We recognize that, that there is this willingness to address the issue, but then what we see is the way it is addressed does not always bring the results we are hoping for. But again, we are at the beginning of this conversation and definitely looking forward to continue it. I don't know to what extent you realize we have actually quite also a number of international registrations today. So when you talk about Solvency II, we talk about Solvency II, we always know this has also always international interest. when we look at the European framework and compare and contrast it, with other frameworks around the globe, there is clearly the worry expressed that the European insurance industry potentially might lose out in terms of competitiveness, because we are proud to be called sometimes the gold standard, but then it carries also a certain weight sometimes. The question, therefore, is to what extent or can Iopa at all look at competitiveness internationally? I know your mission statement is certainly not including competitiveness, but is this something that you intend to do moving forward, or how do you think certain imbalances could be addressed?
Well, I think that it's a very good question, because in the end, insurance markets are international markets. So that's the first. Second, I believe that we have a very good framework in Europe, and I think that leads to a lot of trust and confidence in our markets. And I think we have a market of good repute. Of course, there are also outliers, but that keeps supervisors busy, and it should. But I think overall, that is not just the standard that is being followed with interest from an interest perspective, but it's just also being followed by jurisdictions who are also taking this approach in their framework. Now, what we do, of course, already now in the last week is we closely talk to some of the jurisdictions outside of the EU, already explaining what we see in the new proposals, explaining what we believe it means, and therefore taking other jurisdictions along in what is happening in the Solvency II negotiations. We play a very active role in the IIS and in discussions there on to come to a capital standard at a worldwide level. I think that will benefit the industry if we have that. And having said that all, we will remain very positive on this dialogue. We will invest in it. But also we see that the Solvency II framework indeed was not there to increase competitiveness, but has a focus on policyholder protection and a robust market and stability. And I think that will come first. But then we will always be happy to enter into dialogues to ensure that our industry has a worldwide opportunity to do business.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. I think in any case, at international level, the debates are certainly progressing, and Solvency II should hopefully also, in its revised version, then, have resonance and impact in these discussions. I'm checking the time. I think we are slowly but surely turning towards one of the last questions. So last but certainly not least, let's turn to pensions. I know this is also something that is very close to your heart. Insurance Europe, we will in fact publish next month the results of our second Pan-European pension survey. And it has a bit sobering results, because it shows that more than a third of people are not saving for retirement. It includes obviously more women than men. We have more younger people that do not save. We have more people with lower educational qualifications, obviously the unemployed. So from a regulatory perspective, what do you think can be done to promote financial well-being in old age? Is there a role for Iopa?
Yes, thank you for the question. And it's a topic dear to my heart indeed. We see really a pension gap happening on an aging continent, and that is a concern. And I also agree that it's more a concern for the female part of that continent than the male part. And what we are doing here right now is we're developing an advice after a call for advice on a pension tracking system, which will show individually what gaps there are, but also a dashboard showing per member state whether or not there are gaps. And of course, this is only the start of work moving towards first having data and identifying gaps. There we are again, but then also finding ways to close those gaps. And I very much feel that that's not just a field for IOPs, but definitely also a field for insurers, where there's still a lot of opportunity, but also really in need. And here, through communication, through identifying gaps, through collecting information and sharing that, I definitely feel that EIOPA has a role to encourage people to think about how they will live at an old age and thereby start saving for their pensions, for sure.
So let's really hope, that is a topic where I think insurers want to continue to engage. So let's really hope we make some progress here. So we come, unfortunately, already to the close of our small discussion here this afternoon. But let me ask one final question. You are now having a 5-year mandate, potentially a 10-year if you decide to prolong and if you are confirmed afterwards. If you now think ahead to the next 5 years, what would you like to be the 3 defining words that characterize your mandate as EIOPA chair?
Yes, that's a hard question. I'll say 3 things and not 3 words, because that's I think it starts with the fundamentals. So that means robust, resilient, stable, and we will have discussions on Solvency II, but I think overall we need to stay that robust market that we are, and we need to work on that jointly. Because second, if we have that, we can build and respond to the new developments. It's sustainability. Let's keep pace there. We're ahead of the curve. Let's stay that way, and let's incentivize also our policyholders or your policyholders to act and adapt. But also on the digital part, I'm not saying we're ahead of the curve, but here where we can make the difference, I believe, as a European market, is that we not just become digital, but we do it in a safe way. Data protection, cyber resilience, we do it in an ethical way, think AI, and we do it in an inclusive way. And if that at the end of the 5 years is happening, I would be very happy. And finally, the third topic, and we mentioned it, let's close some gaps, starting with data gaps, but then also particularly the pension gap, but also some other new risks that are currently dealing with gaps. Let's close the gaps. And then I think I'll be happy after 5 years.
Okay, well then let's hope that through these 5 years, the dialogue remains as lively and active as we have seen it here today. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you, and goodbye to everyone.